Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Ransomware, When Defensive Fails, What Then? We're joined today with an all-star crew, and I'm very much looking forward to our discussions. For those in the audience, my ask is that go ahead and be part of today's discussion. Do ask questions. As your moderator, by the way, my name is Jessica Gulick from Cat's Eye. I will be watching those questions, and I will be the one to run referee and ask the questions from each one of these experts, so you guys get the information you need from today's discussion. And really what we're talking about here is we're looking to get advice from these experts in cyber insurance, ransomware negotiation, ransomware kill switch, and in regards to what is it that our audience needs to know in order to better prepare for when an event like ransomware happens to their organizations. So welcome, go ahead and get seated. You're in the audience, and let's go ahead and start. Gentlemen, I would love it if you would just tell us a little bit about who you are, what your expertise is, and why don't we go ahead and get started with Ritesh.
Hey guys, welcome to the webinar. Thank you for the time, and Jessica, I appreciate the invitation to be here with an esteemed panel. My name is Ritesh Agrawal. I'm the CEO and founder of Airgap Networks. You can find us at airgap.io. We offer ransomware protection to our customers essentially, and we are the inventor and distributor of a switch, which is called Ransomware Kill Switch. It's a switch that you should all deploy, in my humble opinion. It would provide you the protection that you need and reduce the blast radius. Someday, potentially, it'll save lives. That probably summarizes what we do. There's a lot of things under the hood that we can discuss with you. We understand the issues that ransomware sort of poses for you. We understand how ransomware propagates inside the organization. And the way our investors and our customers describe our solution is we are solving the first principle problems. We're going to the crux of the issue and solving the problem as opposed to putting band-aids on top of it. More as we discuss through the rest of this conversation. I look forward to that, and I look forward to seeing you at airgap.io.
You're muted.
Thank you so much. Curtis, would you introduce yourself, please?
Yep, sure. I am Curtis Minder. I'm the co-founder and CEO of GroupSense. You can find us at groupsense.io. And I always forget to do that. So Ritesh, thanks for reminding me. Yeah, so we're in the digital reconnaissance and digital risk space. Our primary product is around the external digital footprint for enterprises. As part of that, we've recently, relatively recently, about a year ago, February, we got involved in detecting what they call the initial access brokers related to ransomware deployment. And as part of that, as we started pulling on those strings, we ended up becoming negotiators on behalf of victims that were victims of the ransomware attacks. And over the last year, we've done numerous engagements with large enterprises all the way up to the Fortune 50, all the way down to sort of mid-market and SMB companies, helping them navigate the ransomware problem. And over the last few months, we've developed, we've taken the lessons we've learned from those engagements, and we've developed some ransomware preparedness packages for clients, because we learned, many clients, even though they have an incident response plan in place, aren't necessarily ready when the ransomware hits. There's some very specific elements to that. So we've developed a program around that to try to help prevent and help folks when it actually happens. So thank you.
Thank you, Curtis. Austin?
Hey everyone, my name is Austin Bachwinkle. Pleasure to be with you today. I'm a cyber insurance broker and self-proclaimed cyber insurance nerd by trade. I've been doing it as long as it's been cool, which is only about 6 or 7 years, but I can tell you a pretty good story about sort of the arc of cyber insurance and where we're at today. I work for a company presently called Hauser, which focuses on private equity firms and portfolio risk management across those private equity clients that we have, and spend a lot of time educating and advising around cyber risk within that. I started my career at Aon Corporation in Chicago, which will shortly be the largest broker in the world. So some good experience there, and excited to talk to you a little bit more about the insurance solutions that exist.
Excellent. Gentlemen, let's dig in. So ransomware is not new. It's been around for a while. But what is new is this rise that we're seeing. We're seeing a lot more of it. We're seeing some really hot areas being targeted, and it's now become very much a table conversation in every home. What are your thoughts on what really drove this rise to happen? Any observations on maybe the market situation or anything?
I can probably take a stab at this, and I'm going to risk my modesty here a little bit, so please bear with me on this one. I hate to say I told you so, but I also want to say that this is just the tip of the iceberg. There are three reasons I will tell you. Two are associated with criminals, the other one is associated with nation states. But if you look at any criminal organization, the two key ingredients for massive success is the anonymity, which cryptocurrency provides you. And the second one is essentially financial gain, which obviously ransomware provides you that. So these are the two ingredients, and they're not going anywhere. Financial gain is going to be there, and cryptocurrency is here to stay. This is only going to get bigger. I can imagine as a criminal, why would you want to peddle drugs when you can much the same hire some engineers? And it's extremely easy to breach anybody. It's unbelievably easy. And it's only because I think many of the organizations act like teenagers. They think they're invincible until they find out the other way around. And that's my biggest frustration is I talk to one set of customer that says, I'm good. I bought that phishing solution and I'm good. Until they find out and they get hurt and they come to me and say, now help me. Like, yes, I will try to help you for the next time, but the damage is done. You got to do what you got to do now. So that's the polarization. The third aspect I will tell you, nation state don't care about financial gain or anonymity. They will do what they have to do. And I think they are going to get involved now. It's much easier to hurt United States and other countries using ransomware than it is through any other means or mechanism. And I think we'll see more of that as we go forward. So please don't act like a teenager. Don't think you have all the sufficient. There are three of us who can obviously talk about this all day long, but I would love to welcome a conversation one-on-one if you wanted to discuss with you why your solutions may not be sufficient without sales pressure. I promise you, I'm here to make sure that everybody's protected. Commercial success will follow.
Yeah, I think I would build on the economic and financial gain component of ransomware. If you just look at, cyber attacks in general and stay away from all the other dark market activities like drug dealing and all of that. I think, frankly, they're making money a lot faster with ransomware than they were with data exfil and trying to monetize that data on the dark web. And there's an oversaturation of it there, right? So, wow, we can make money a lot more efficiently by locking you up and extorting you than worrying about stealing your social security numbers and then trying to monetize it.
Yeah, and I think I'll just add one last point to that. In addition to the items that Ritesh mentioned, I think the amnesty that's provided by the nation states for the criminal actors is contributing to this, obviously. I'm also, I'm sympathetic to some of the smaller businesses who don't have the means, don't have an IT person on staff, et cetera. But the larger businesses, though, as we've taken inventory on how the threat actors have gained access, it basically boils down to about 4 or 5 basic cyber hygiene things that they could have prevented. And so I think that's the key takeaway from this is some basic cyber hygiene lowers the risk considerably for most of the victims.
So Ritesh, you had said this is the tip of the iceberg, right? Although we've had a couple of some main attacks in the news, if you will, for the last, let's say, year. Do you guys think that the community is adapting at all? Are you seeing any kind of response by our community to start to take some steps that they may have not taken before? Is there a seriousness, I guess, to this problem that you're starting to see?
Seriousness for sure. Action, I'm not sure yet. So I think everybody's concerned about ransomware. I'm exhausted. The number of calls we're accepting every day is just not even funny. So, but I also, like I said before, I also see lack of talent or knowledge, in some cases lack of means, like Curtis was mentioning, and definitely sympathize with smaller customers who don't have the means to protect against the digital footprint expansion that they're seeing for themselves. Mm-hmm. But I have no excuse or forgiveness for the likes of Colonial Pipeline, and not hiring a CISO for such a large organization is not a forgivable offense, in my humble opinion. It should not be spared. So I think the first thing that I would want all of us to do as a community and probably as a government is to ensure that we put some rules of engagement in place where organizations that have mission critical infrastructure or customer data or responsibility towards a community at large must meet certain criteria. Like Curtis mentioned, these are basic hygiene. Seriously, if you do basic hygiene, we can bring down the level of attacks dramatically and very quickly as well. So that, in my opinion, that's the best thing that we can do collectively. Everything else is probably, I mean, government talks about sharing of information between private and government, and this has happened in '99 with Bill Clinton in office as well. Look where it got us. So I don't believe in some of those ideas. I encourage that. I'm happy that something is happening, but I'm skeptical about the outcomes from those given the past history of such engagements.
Yeah, I'm grateful for the awareness that the news is bringing to this. I use the metaphor a few times though, where I think there's still a lot of businesses who think that's someone else's problem. It's not going to happen to me. And I use the metaphor. It's like, it's almost like the COVID thing. It's like people didn't take COVID seriously until someone they knew was affected by it. And I think we're getting closer to the point where that's going to be the case for most enterprises, where they're going to, if they haven't been a victim themselves, they will know a victim, and that will change behavior dramatically.
Yeah, I agree with that. Speaking from a strictly a risk management perspective, adoption of risk transfer solutions like cyber insurance have definitely grown, and it's growing rapidly in response to all the media attention that's being received. One of the interesting changes, which I can expand on a little bit more later in today's discussion, is that insurance is by no means a silver bullet, and it's not a solution to stick your head in the sand and go buy a bunch of insurance and then be ignorant or negligent with the basic cyber hygiene controls that we'll talk about today. And what is nice and a recent change is that the insurers have basically quit allowing that by not offering coverage to businesses, small, medium, and large, that show an unwillingness to implement certain cyber controls and basic cyber hygiene. So it's nice that there's sort of this shift to forcing what everyone needs to be doing, because that's in everyone's best interest.
So what are the implications on the cyber insurance market, Austin? I mean, what kind of trends have you seen as a result of the attention ransomware is getting?
Sure. Yeah, I can talk for a few minutes about that. Cyber insurance as a product actually 22, 23 years old at this point, but it has evolved dramatically over that time, as you might imagine, given how the threat landscape has changed and sort of the risk dynamics have changed. And, in its current form, it looks much different than it did even 18 months ago. So the evolution has changed with the product itself, how it's underwritten, how it's priced, and how it's being utilized has just completely changed. So it's one of those that I find super exciting because, it's just always changing. You have to stay on top of it. So, about 5 years ago, cyber insurance began to pick up steam, and that was really after the Target data breach, and there was a big wave of adoption and attention after Target had their issue. We saw this big influx of interest and a few insurers jumping on board, and the maximum capacity in the insurance marketplace was something like $300 or $400 million in total limit. Fast forward to today, that theoretical capacity is up to 750 million to $1 billion. So we've got a lot more insurers that are willing to provide the coverage. That drove pricing down to sort of bottom of the basement, dare I say, unsustainable levels over the past 36 months, and that has since changed from ransomware. So really, the big impact over the last 18 months has been that ransomware has skyrocketed premiums. It has changed how underwriters are viewing, assessing, and underwriting risk, and making it much more difficult, frankly, to procure a policy. So it's certainly possible, but as I mentioned before, they're not going to accept organizations that have a disinterest in implementing multi-factor authentication, or organizations that don't have patching procedures in place, or organizations that are unwilling to do penetration and vulnerability scanning on an annual basis. So, I'm frankly encouraged by all of that, because it's going to create better risks out there. But certainly there are some pain points right now with, even clients of mine that are working through insurance renewals, and their current insurer saying, well, I'm sorry, we're not going to offer you a renewal quote because you just don't meet the minimum required practices that we have today. So With that said, cyber insurance as a tool is extremely valuable. It's not a silver bullet, as I said, but when you consider the financial risk that it represents, it's unreasonable for a company to try to self-insure and absorb all of that risk by themselves. So it should be one of the tools in every business's toolbox, and implemented appropriately along with all the other risk management controls that we advise our clients on.
Now, just to clarify something that you said, it sounded like that some cyber insurance companies are actually no longer accepting ransomware insurance policies. In the cases where you have a company that does do some type of due diligence in terms of risk management, is cyber insurance part of what they need to consider as they think through the mitigating controls for a ransomware attack?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, especially for the smaller businesses out there that are not necessarily being forced into, certain controls by anyone else, the cyber insurer sort of represents Big Brother in certain cases to say, hey, you really need to do this, or you're just not going to have the insurance that you need. And I'll just clarify, one point specifically around the coverage within a cyber insurance policy that covers ransomware events. It's referred to as cyber extortion. And that is still very much available, though I will tell you we have seen a lot of insurers begin to sublimit or increase the deductibles associated with that particular coverage. So for instance, if you're buying a $10 million cyber insurance policy and you have controls that are not up to par, they might say, hey, we're only willing to provide $2.5 million for cyber extortion ransomware coverage rather than a full $10 million limit, or you might have a $5 million deductible before they even begin to cover you. So there are some changes with the logistics of those coverages, but they're still very much available.
No, thank you for that clarity. That was very good. So gentlemen, if I can only insure, if insurance is only one piece of this, right? We're seeing that 80% of organizations, we think, I kind of put the thumb out there because not everybody's reporting, have paid ransomware when they're hit. What preventative measures help to break this kill chain of ransomware? I mean, what can they be doing? What makes you less of a soft target?
Well, this actually plays into the discussion about what's also making this so pervasive and increasing in numbers. The sophistication required for someone to actually execute a ransomware attack has gone down considerably. So, obviously, you've got the ransomware as a service platforms that the threat actors can basically lease from the ransomware gangs. And then now you've got marketplaces with what we call initial access brokers that are selling the network access component. So you don't have to be a threat actor or a bad hacker, if you will, to do this. You just need some cryptocurrency wallet and a Tor browser, and you can go buy the access and buy the platform to execute the ransomware and make money. So it's simplified. So one of the things that we've advised clients are to be aware of that from an external attack surface perspective. So what are did somebody open up an RDP port that you didn't know about and leave it open? That's got to be like 60% of our victims that we deal with is a remote access that was opened up for an executive because of COVID, and then they forgot about it. So attack surface awareness and management, and then also monitoring for those initial access brokers is important.
I would say, look, first of all, I really appreciate that the insurance companies are now demanding basic hygiene before they underwrite any of the policies. And that is definitely first step towards ensuring that customers have another reminder that what you said, I'm just taking a aim at this anti-phishing solution. I have anti-phishing solution and I'm good, or I have an EDR solution and I'm good, or I have a backup and I'm good. None of these are good enough answers. I think a company like insurance companies can start to put that floodgate, and these compliance or requirements actually sometimes, even if you're not ready to do that, force you to have that basic hygiene implemented. That's very, very important. I think that would definitely help a lot as an industry. And education. I don't know how we make it possible for every IT organization to pass some sort of certification test on how to have the basic hygiene of cybersecurity. I have no idea. I think a lot of education is happening that is very vendor specific. So I'm a Cisco certified blah, or I'm a Juniper certified XYZ engineer or a Palo Alto engineer. That is very, very centric to these organizations. I don't know if there is a way government or us collectively come across as a neutral, vendor neutral education ground where certification is necessary for an organization. And for sure, insurance can act as an initial sort of floodgate control. You cannot get in unless you have at least 2 people in your organization that are ransomware certified, if I may.
Yeah, I think a lot of organizations have been adhering to some sort of combination of NIST and ISO for a relative framework. And you know, I have to give credit to the insurers. They move really slowly because they're massive companies and their underwriting staff are good people, but they're not all technology wizards. They're not all cybersecurity wizards. So frankly, it's taken a while, it's taken years for them to begin to even ask the right questions when they're evaluating risk in companies. So that shift has started to occur now. But again, just as soon as we think we figure out the right questions to ask around ransomware prevention and you know, the related controls, the risk is going to shift, and we're going to have to you know figure out the next series of questions. So it's very dynamic.
No, that's good. As we move towards the conversation really about how to protect against ransomware, why don't we set it up by first discussing what does ransomware look like, or what I mean, can you help our audience visualize? You know, is it something that gets into the network and, you know, obviously encrypts the data and they call you, et cetera, but what does it really look like? What are the immediate operational indicators that ransomware is on the network? Can anybody kind of break that down for me?
I could take a stab at this. Let me start by telling what ransomware is not or should not be considered. First thing first is you should not be waiting or investing in technology to detect ransomware, because guess what? It's going to reveal itself. So just wait for 45 minutes and your screen will show that you've been impacted. And that's probably the best indicator that you have that you've been impacted, but that's too late. The second thing about ransomware is it likes to propagate. It is not one of those, you know, I'll sit in a corner for 16 months before I actually impact one device and surgically steal some data. Ransomware so far, and I'm pretty sure there will be potent version of ransomware that will evolve as we go. But as of now, it likes to expand. So the first indicator for you is to see if there is a pattern of expansion. And in case of Airgap, and as the name suggests, Airgap, which is to airgap your devices, so expansion is not even possible. Essentially, that's what we make it happen. We just don't allow you to the ransomware to expand either laterally to other devices or vertically to your business application by fixing some fundamental flaws. And those are the 2 things that you can do. There are a bunch of small indicators like file encryption going on inside your organization, and you can put monitors for those, like repeated authentication failures to certain properties. Remote desktop protocol could be another one. Windows file share, encryption, Active Directory damage or assault, if I would. So there are a bunch of signals that we also catch. Unusual pattern between, you know, credential exchange from some endpoints using administrative credentials that is unusually sort of out there compared to what you've seen in the past in terms of the pattern. So there are so many things that you could do, but first thing first is to just air gap everything. And I'm pun intended, but I'm just trying to say that the air gapping is probably the most important thing that you can do.
Well, and let's not forget the data exfiltration, which is
true.
You know, standard operating procedure for the threat actors now. And in most cases, you know, hundreds of gigs, if not terabytes of data are removed before they execute anything. And there's all kinds of opportunity to recognize that as it leaves the network.
Yeah, one interesting point on the data exfil, I call it the double dip, right? Because you get locked up, they demand a ransom, and then you pay that, and they say, oh, well, we took this data while we were in there, and if you don't want us to go publish this on our blog on the dark web, then pay us another X. I want to debunk a myth, which is if you go and you pay and you get that data back before they allegedly, you know, post it to their blog, from a legal liability perspective, at least here in the United States and in the EU, it does not matter. You've still suffered a data breach. You still need to adhere to all the federal and state guidelines for notification around all of that. So I feel like that's a question that gets asked really commonly, and I just thought I'd throw that out there.
Well, and I'll tell you, Austin, I hope the threat actors are watching our webinar, because they use that all the time as leverage. They're like, well, if you just pay us, then you don't have to notify you. And we have to, every time we like, hey, we told you this last time. We talked to you guys like 10 times last month, and you say the same thing every time. And we tell you, like, we have to notify the law enforcement anyway. So
yeah, the breach already occurred, right? So.
Right, the breach already occurred, and I tell them every time, and they still say it. But the other thing I wanted to talk about with the data exfil that actually a client had told me after we worked on one of their cases that I mean, it should have been obvious, but it was just coming from their mouth. It really hit me hard, and that was after the incident and after we cleaned things up. We were talking about what they were going to do differently in the organization. I always ask that question. This is a CISO of a very large manufacturer in Europe. And he said, he was walking me through what he's going to do different. And I said, hey, what about this is like lingering that's going to bother you? We're providing these monitoring services for them to make sure the bad guys don't leak this data and stuff like that. And he said, well, really, that is the issue, because despite the operational interruption that the ransomware caused the business, which was costly to them, he said their bigger concern, economic concern actually, is that the intellectual property that was exfiltrated, their recipe for the thing that they've been building for 100 years ends up in a Chinese competitor shop and shows up in the market a few years later. And he said that would be potentially more financially damaging than any of the business disruption that the ransomware itself had. And so it's just telling about how much impact ransomware can have beyond just the encryption part. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this triple extortion has become a big deal, right? I mean, not only the information could be sold in the black market for gain, but information could be sent to your customers to threaten you back, and using that as a pressure tactic for you to pay. I mean, look, there's one thing where my information could be lost, and that many organizations decide to keep quiet about it and not inform anybody, especially the smaller ones that are not under a lot of regulation. But if that information now is being sent to their customers, and many small, medium organizations run with handful of customers, essentially. They may have long tail of customers, but the business actually survives with a handful of customers. So these attackers are getting very clever. They know that if this data goes out to those handful of customers, this is the game over for the business, and business is going to pay a lot of money. I have known of and spoken to a couple of business owners that had to shut down their business after ransomware attack because they couldn't pay enough, and when they paid enough, they just couldn't recover from that business loss, essentially.
Yeah, the reputational impact is huge, and even the theft of intellectual property and trade secrets, right? I mean, and frankly, that is the stuff that is really challenging to put a value on in the context of an actual insurance claim. So while the policy might actually say, yeah, we'll cover that, you have to be able to prove its value in order to get some sort of dollars in the form of, a check from the insurance company, right? So, yeah, and, frankly, I'm passionate about that small and middle market space, Ritesh, for that exact reason, right? These big companies, they can weather the storm. They've got their own resources. They can pay all that money out and probably still keep chugging along. But, if I've got a mom and pop, widget maker in California that is 15 employees and they get hit with ransomware, they might be out of business forever. So that's where, frankly, I find a lot of value in what the insurers are able to do for the smaller businesses.
So that's fascinating because they say something like 8% of paid ransoms get their data back. That means 92% don't. Right? So is it, how, I guess, how delicate or how much of an expert do you need to be? And I guess I should ask the negotiator here, how important are your negotiation skills whenever you're talking with somebody who has ransomed your data?
So I've read those statistics. We haven't seen that. It's actually been more the flip side, where most of the people are getting access to their data back. When it doesn't occur, it's not usually because the threat actors are malicious. There's some exceptions to that, and I'll tell you about that in a second. It's because their decryptors are pieces of junk, and there's an actual technical glitch that causes the issue. So in most cases, yeah, we are getting access back to the systems. And we have some clever ways to get around that as well. So when you combine, like, for example, the ransomware shaming and or the proof of life with the encrypted software. Sometimes you can actually retrieve files while this is happening. We've done that before. So you can get creative about it. So it's not just about the negotiation, it's about understanding the entire ecosystem. But having some decent negotiation skills and some knowledge of who you're negotiating with, it definitely brings significant value to the table. I will say that one of the mistakes that we see and we get brought in sort of retroactively on, those are the worst, because it's the bad guys don't care who they're talking to most of the time. I can't differentiate myself from someone else doing the negotiation, but we get brought in sometimes where some of the victims, and sometimes Austin, it's like the folks that the mid-market folks try to do this themselves, and they're angry and they're emotional. And this plays very well into the bad guys' plan. Like they love that and they're good at it, and it doesn't go well. And so one of the things that a negotiation firm will bring to the table is some counseling and objectivity around that communication. So you don't need to tell the bad guys that they're bad guys. You don't need to yell at them or be angry, and you shouldn't lie to them. Actually, you need to negotiate in good faith, because keep in mind, these people probably have copies of your books, your financials. So they're going to know how much cash you have and how much money you make and what you owe. And so that's, all those things are sort of basic mistakes that some of the small businesses that have tried to engage themselves have found themselves in.
So I do want to step back here. Oh, go ahead, right ahead, Austin.
I just wanted to support those comments, Curtis, and just say, if there's any heartburn out there in the audience about paying and not getting your data back, I've had the opposite experience, and vast majority of the time, if appropriately handled, those negotiations and sort of the transaction to get that decryptor key and regain access to your systems is successful.
I do want to help our audience get a really good understanding of a ransomware attack. Let me see if I can approach this in another question, because what I'm hearing from you all is that, they could have access originally to a portion of the data, to all the data, or perhaps they're moving around your network and, ransoming, piece by piece, coming back again and again. Is that what it's like? I think when we have basic, simple conversations about ransomware in the public, we all just assume if ransomware occurred on your network, they have complete access to all data on your network. Is that a true statement, or is it really more like, Ratish, you were saying, they move around and they explore different parts of your network, and then it's possible to stop them and perhaps really just isolate the impact so they don't get access to everything? Does that make sense? Can you guys help me understand that a little further?
Yeah, look, it's very simple in that sense. The first victim is impacted, and the whole industry somehow is focused sort of obsessively on protecting the first victim. While I think the customers and many of the audience can confirm this, they probably admit and accept the fact that one victim is going to be infected. Now, there's not much you can do about it. There's so many ways to get into your computer. One of the laptops is just not even funny now. In fact, it wouldn't be a stretch goal to imagine that pretty much all Fortune 500 companies have at least one of their laptops available in dark web for rent, so-called ransomware as a service. So you could, theoretically, if you have the right access in the dark web, you could gain access to that laptop by paying probably a few pennies or a few dollars. Now you actually are present on the laptop. This is one of the innocent employee that is probably busy doing whatever job they do. The attacker is going to then carefully start to look around. Where all can I go from here? Is this the executive's laptop, which has god-awful amount of access? Or is this a contractor's laptop that has some access? Not a whole lot. Hopefully the design is correct. The enterprise design is correct. If the enterprise design is not correct, then any laptop you get, you have all the access in the world that you want. In either case, the attacker systematically would try to say, okay, how can I hop into other endpoints in the network? And then from there, start looking at where I have the most access from. And so that's what they're going to do silently and quietly and really slowly, so that any of your threat detection platforms cannot catch their attempt. If it's super slow, then it's that much harder to detect the so-called the anomaly. Then once they are in a position to access your crown jewels, they'll start sort of touching and feeling, is this really important data for me? And if it's some garbage data, I'm going to move on to the next one until they get to a state where they now have access to all the stuff and they have access to all the data that they need. And then, like Curtis was saying, slowly with a straw, they will sift the data. And over a period of a month, 2 months, 6 months, sometimes even longer, they'll sift the data out into their server. All of this is a very long process. And depending on the cycle where you caught them and where you got, for the lack of a better word, I would say you put your act together, you may stop that data exfiltration, you may stop that proliferation, you may stop that transition. So short answer to your question is, it depends on when do you catch them in their act. And it's a long cycle.
Yeah, I agree. It depends. And I just wanted to point out the irony that often they're pivoting around your network using your backup credentials.
and to that point, Curtis, this is no joke. I can tell this to everybody on this call. I'm sure you have known about a company called dehashed.com, DESHASHED.com. Those who haven't, please go there. I'm no commission with them. I don't know, they don't know me. I don't know them per se personally. But here is why. Plug in your email address and it'll show you the passwords they've been breached. And you would be shocked, as I was. I saw my passwords in plain text pop up. And I don't know of anybody who's never in their career used a password for, let's say, social media account like LinkedIn, Yahoo, or TikTok, and they use the same password for the corporate account. So now let's put it together. Let's say I know your email address, Jessica. I can take, I have that from the invite that you sent me. I can plug in that email into dehashed. It'll pop a few of your old passwords. I can take that password and try on your corporate account. And there is a good chance I'll be successful.
Well, I feel like that is really irresponsible of dehash. Now, we manage a very large breach database ourselves, and we use that for both account takeover protections, sort of the incident that happened with Colonial, for example, detecting when an employee used a third-party site, user credential at a third-party site, that site got popped. So that's what we use it primarily for. But I wanted to point this out. We also use it, because this actually plays off of Ritesh's comment. We also use it on the bad guys. So the bad guys are terrible at passwords too. They're as lazy as we are, and they are in breaches also. And so we use that same data to do attribution work. But I think it's irresponsible of dehash to provide other people's dehash passwords publicly. So, like, have I been pwned? Will not do that, right? They will just tell you whether you've been in a breach or not, but they will not provide that data unless you're the owner of the credential, which is a more responsible way to do that.
Yeah, I try to go to dehashed once in 6 months or sooner sometimes, just to see. And I saw some of the passwords that almost blew my lid off. Like, whoa, wait a minute. This is my password for my Gmail account. And God forbid if that account were to be lost, I will be in really difficult state, actually. So, yeah.
I can't help but think that I almost want to take people I know, like, let's take Curtis's email and see what kind of passwords he's had in the past.
I do it to journalists all the time. I just, I have your password. Do you want to see it? Like, I have it. I do.
What is Blue Parrot about? It could be a great conversational piece. Maybe not. That's funny. That's very funny. So infection does spread. So in terms of incident response, what advice can we give the listeners in terms of, okay, now the incident has occurred, let's say there's ransomware and you think that you have some knowledge that something might be going on. What can you do? What actionable steps can you take?
So you mentioned incident response. There's sort of multiple components to that, and most mature companies will have an incident response plan and perhaps a retainer with an incident responder firm. Most of what traditional incident responders do, and Aon, who owns Strauss Freiberg, is one of the top providers of these types of services, along with Mandiant and some other big brands. But they're going to do the technical part, right? They're going to look and see what the exposure was, what the damage was, what kind of malware was used. They'll isolate it. They'll analyze it. They'll hopefully help you lock the doors. The part that gets sort of overlooked often is the business part of it. And that's something that we've been helping companies with, which is when we first started doing this and we were going into these very large companies, we were watching very put together Fortune 50 companies yell at each other in their boardroom. And we decided that we didn't like all the yelling. So we came up with some suggestions on how to avoid that. And that is to plan in advance about who your response team from a business perspective is, who owns those decisions, who's ultimately in charge about the financial components. Also planning for the financial components often is overlooked, right? So let's say you do decide as a business that it's within your ethics and the impact is such that you're willing to potentially pay a ransom. Your bank may not allow you to transfer $2 million to a crypto brokerage. And it would be nice to know that in advance, because the bad guys don't care about your bank problems. They don't, right? So, and they don't like excuses or delays. And so getting in front of that and understanding what that process looks like, how to do that responsibly. There is, always risk when you're dealing with cryptocurrencies, depending on which ones there are. Less so with Bitcoin, more for example with Monero, which we see often, which is a privacy token. And so understanding all of those risks, understanding that process, and having a plan in place just in case and that gets overlooked by most companies, but it's invaluable.
Excellent.
Yeah, one other thing I'd add to that is to try to coordinate incident response through an attorney for attorney-client privilege, right? So when you've got these issues, you do not want to cowboy up and try to figure them out yourself with your own IT staff unless you're a very big, large company that's ready for this. So hire an expert or hire a series of experts, more like it, but make sure you're running all that through a privacy attorney. There are many great ones out there that have experience with all different sorts of vendors and all different sorts of breaches, and they can really help sort of direct traffic, so to speak, in the incident response, and actually retain these vendors on your behalf and all under privilege so that those findings are privileged and not causing more issues down the road. Just one fine point on those folks that do purchase cyber insurance. One of the most common pitfalls or issues I see with my clients is they want to go out and hire whoever they want. Well, you need to read the fine language in those insurance policies, because oftentimes the insurers have panels of vendors that are pre-approved and required for use. So you can't go hire the IT guy or gal down the street. You need to hire FireEye or one of the big names that that are reputable and that have an agreement with the insurer in place. Group sense. There you go. Yeah. Yes. So all of that, and so just make sure that you're following the rules, so to speak, and do not skimp on hiring experts for anything like this.
I want to give another reason.
You can turn into a big one. Please, yes.
Yeah, I want to give another reason. I am glad you said that, Austin, because here's the thing. Do not Google how to decrypt ransom or Ragnar Locker. Don't do this, because there are so many scammers that are going to show up, and they're scammers who will pretend that they can decrypt your software, but what they actually do is they go negotiate on your behalf without your knowledge, and then mark up the ransom and use the bad guys' decryptors. That's a thing that happens.
Wow.
And I hate those guys. And there's tons of them, and they pay for Google ads, right? And so what I tell victims is go, even if you don't have one on retainer, go to a breach law firm and pay the 1 hour fee for them to make a referral, or whatever. It's maybe $700 or something they'll charge you, right? So just do that, because that's the only way you're going to know for sure you're getting a reputable firm. They've been vetted by a practitioner. So that's another reason to do what you're saying, in addition to the client attorney privilege components.
At what point does cyber insurance get involved? Is it after the fact, after everything cleared up?
No, immediately, yeah. So that's one of the unique things about it, and one of the issues. So a lot of folks, say, "Oh, wow, my building burnt down. It's in ashes. Now I'm going to call my insurance company and get the check." Right.
Mm-hmm.
For a cyber attack, they actually get involved on the front end, right? And they're helping, again, to coordinate the incident response and try to mitigate the loss and reduce, the total impact to the business along the way. So, again, if you have an incident response plan, it's very likely that there are a few internal calls that you make, and then one of the very first external calls is, to your cyber insurance broker, who can file a claim with the insurer, get that running up to speed, and then start to coordinate all of the incident response activities. And again, that should happen ASAP once you're realizing that you might have an issue on your hand.
It's good to know. Now, Ritesh, Airgap is known for their ransomware kill switch. What is that?
Well, as the name suggests, this is literally a way to stop the propagation of ransomware and essentially reduce the blast radius. it's usually true, and there are exceptions all the time for every statement that I make, but usually true that the amount of ransom you pay is directly proportional to number of endpoints or servers or data storage units that have been compromised, essentially. So we would reduce that dramatically down. The other thing that I always do, and I talk to CIOs and CISOs, and some of them may be on this call live, or they may listen to this post this session. And my question to them, all of them, is assume that it's about 1 or 2 p.m. Pacific time, you have been breached. What would be your action plan? And other than my SOC team is going to take care of it, what is your SOC team that is going to do? And what would be your recommendation to them? And when you get to that, they all have only 2 or 3 answers for me. One is, we'll shut down the network. Like, really, that's not an acceptable answer if you're managing anything that is valuable. Because it's going to be loss of employee productivity. The second answer I get is, we will identify the infected devices and we will eliminate them from the network. And I was like, really? It's like, I will identify all the COVID-19 patients and ask them to quarantine, and we would not have any problem. If your government had that plan for you, you know where it's going. That plan is not going very well. And the third, on a funnier note, but possibly serious note, is suck my thumb, curl in a fetal position, start crying. That's the only thing I can do. So then I explained to them, the ransomware kill switch essentially surgically stops the threat propagation. Let me explain you. This is like, conceptually think of this as a selector switch. There are 4 levels to the ransomware kill switch. Depending on the selection that you have made, and everything is digital, everything is automated, but just the conceptual framework to share with everybody, you can decide to take certain actions in those categories. So if we've conveniently named the levels as green, yellow, orange, and red, like a DEFCON level. And under each level or category, you have set of policies that we help you define. So you could say, if I'm in orange category, I want to stop all non-essential communications inside my organization, or non-critical communication inside my organization. I'm in orange category, I want to stop access to my Active Directory and my backup system. I want to unmount all the Dropbox folders from the laptops. I want to stop access to my Office 365. You decide what you want to do. You sit down in your whatever roundtable meeting, you discuss, if there was ransomware, what would we do today? You make a list of that thing, like a tabletop exercise, if I may. You dump that into Airgap. Will take probably a day, half a day, or a couple of hours, depending on the size of your organization. And now you're ready. Airgap will execute those policies for you. And there are 2 aspects to it: the definition of those policies and strategic execution of those policies in your network, in your cloud, in your SaaS applications, in your sort of private data center application. So we'll take care of all of that for you. We have strategic sort of sensors everywhere. We'll execute it all for you. Now, if somebody asks you, your board were to ask you, what happens when you're under ransomware attack? It's like, okay, how severe is it? Oh, it's very, very severe. Oh, I'm going to go all the way to red. This is my policy. We have done tabletop exercises. We do it every quarter. We simulate as if we are under ransomware attack for a couple of hours. Everything is tested. Everything is good. We go back to green. Everything is fine. This is an answer that your insurance company should love. This is an answer that your board should love. And I hope this is an answer your CEO should love. And that's the answer we help you provide.
Thank you. I think that really does paint a very different picture in terms of a capability we haven't seen yet on the market. The ability to really protect different pieces of your network, isolate them depending on your threat con, if you will. Okay. Are there other recommendations that we have, assuming, let's say, your threat con for your network has gone up some? Any other preventive controls or mitigations or actions that you would recommend?
I mean, for me personally, I can tell you one thing that we do is, if you escalate the threat level anywhere from green, we get very aggressive automatically about asking for multi-factor authentication. So I'll give you another example, and I am disappointed with the Colonial Pipeline CEO, as everybody else probably is. What is more disappointing and appalling to me is, he went in front of the Congress and said that my VPN was not MFA capable, and that's why we got ransomware. And that wouldn't be far from truth, I can tell you, because even if the VPN was MFA capable, they would have network level access once the employee passes the MFA test. So let's say a hacker is sitting on that laptop forever. I guarantee you that. The hacker is going to wait for the employee to log in through VPN using MFA. And now the employee is on board. Now I'm going to go pick up my coffee. I'm going to go get my lunch. My laptop is connected. Nobody's watching who's talking to whom. My laptop in the background, the attacker can still do exactly what the attacker did with Colonial Pipeline. So what they should be doing is, in addition to VPN, and I think VPNs are necessary, don't get me wrong. The world is not ready to move to any other means of connection, remote access than the traditional VPN. We will get there eventually, but not today. We should put some sort of a multi-factor authentication test behind VPN. So not just VPN. VPN should be multi-factor capable, but I think every transaction that you're doing should be multi-factor authenticated. And one thing that we do, especially with Airgap Ransomware Kill Switch, is we get very aggressive if we start escalating the threat level. So initially it could be, we will ask you multi-factor authentication for each application once a day. We will never use one authentication and apply it across the board. For example, you authenticate yourself to Facebook. That authentication is not applicable to Google, obviously, and it's not applicable to Salesforce. We do the same thing. You authenticate yourself to finance application, and now you're going to the human resource application. Sorry, you have to authenticate again. But even within the human resource application, for example, when everything is green, maybe we say you authenticate once a day, so 12-hour authentication period. But you escalate the level in the kill switch, and now you're authenticating every hour. You go all the way to the red, you're authenticating every transaction. I don't care. I don't want you to stop the work that you do. I may introduce some inconvenience, but this is for our common good. And you kind of said ThreatCon and DEFCON, which is when we are, as a country, we escalate the level and we are getting extra pat down at the airport. Of course, we all don't like it, but we all know this is for our own good. I think your employee would definitely be of the same opinion. They don't like it, but it's not the IT team to blame. It's the hackers to blame. And that's totally fair. I think hackers should be blamed.
So you're recommending we move from trust but verified to trust within the network, right? I mean, that's a huge shift. I mean, we're going to zero trust networks. We're going to, even within the network, authenticate.
Absolutely. Look,
yeah, but I would like to say also outside the network, and I can say Colonial was negligent in that area as well, where there was a third party site which contained a corporate credential with a reused password. That password and credential were found in a darknet market. The fact that they did not know about that, were not notified, and had not reset that account, plus on top of that, it was apparently a deprecated account that the person didn't even work there anymore and they didn't decommission it. So there's like 3 big no-nos right in a row. So monitoring the external footprint, also monitoring for those initial access brokers, all those are good sort of preventative practices.
No, I appreciate that. As we come to a close on this webinar, gentlemen, I'm going to ask that each one of you give kind of a final advice statement to our audience, if you will. And perhaps, Austin, you could start us off. Is there any final remarks that you would like to make as we close this out on ransomware?
Yeah, cyber risk is a board level issue now. Everybody needs to care and pay attention to it. Risk management around that is really complex. There is no silver bullet. We need to consider utilizing a lot of tools in a toolbox against ransomware and all other sorts of cyber threats. We should be focusing at least at the very minimum on the basic hygiene, which is low-hanging fruit for every company, every shape and form out there. It's easily accessible. And I would encourage everybody to consider the use of cyber insurance and transferring part of that risk as one of those many tools in the toolbox. And there are a lot of really great brokers and advisors out there that can help you navigate that landscape of cyber insurance. It is complex, and you definitely need an expert to help you make sure you're buying a quality product, but they absolutely exist out there and should be used.
I appreciate that, Austin. Thank you for being with us today. Curtis, final thoughts?
I'll just echo what Austin said. There's a short list of preventable things that most companies could be doing from a cyber hygiene perspective that would prevent most of these attacks. I think the media's response to this has been largely reactive, and they're spending a lot of calories on things like making it illegal, which is ridiculous. The idea that we're going to stop or try to block using cryptocurrency, which is not even possible. Those are all, that's the wrong focus. Let's focus on the fact that most of these are preventable and working on that front end. Now, God forbid it does happen, having a plan in place to respond to that, both on the technical side and on the business side is critical. So that's something for every business to consider.
Thank you, Curtis. It's great to hear from a negotiator. Ritesh, what are some of your final thoughts and advice for our audience today?
Oh, absolutely. Hard to top off what Austin and Curtis said, but I'll tell you a couple of things. First thing first is know that ransomware is a big problem, and once you're infected, it's going to be very hard to get out of that. These is like a roach motel. Once the attackers are in, studies have proven, research has shown that they'll keep coming back after you. Your best defense is to never get attacked to begin with. So take it seriously, because once it's late, it's too late. The second thing is there is no silver bullet for it. I've been trying to get into physical shape for the last 2 years. I have to do the work. And there's no government that can pass a law that says I can be in shape. It's just not happening. I'm sorry. So depending on anybody else to take care of this for you, it's like telling somebody else will get me into shape. That's not going to happen. Also, take small steps. You don't have to, much like, I'm going to use the same analogy. I cannot run a marathon tomorrow. I'm sorry, I'm not that fit yet. But I can eventually if I decide to. And I need to start slow. I need to go first mile first before I go into a longer run. So start slow. Don't try to boil the ocean. There are simple hygienic things like multi-factor authentication. Curtis mentioned a bunch of other things, which is to make sure that you can, at least the accounts that are suspended should be eliminated from the access list and stuff like that. Employees who have left the company, do some basic work and you can get there and you'll feel good about it. So finally, reach out to us. I'm happy to discuss this, educate as many people as I can based on my experiences, my knowledge that maybe somewhat, given that I've spent 2 decades in this industry, I know probably a couple of things that may be exclusive to the other people that may not have spent as much time in the industry. I would love to share my views and my opinions. No sales pressure, like I said before. Let's make each other successful. The commercial part will take care of itself.
I appreciate that. Excellent. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much. I really do feel like we've covered some aspects of ransomware that I haven't really seen in blogs and articles and in the media or in other webinars. It's always fun to take part in a discussion with experts and dive into new details, right? So thank you, and thank you to our audience. This concludes today's webinar.
Thank you.
Thank you.